Hello there, I'm David Fleeshman.
And I'm Sue Jenkins, and we'd like to welcome you to session 2 of Saga's Not Going Out Club Drama Workshop.
We're both obviously professional actors and theatre directors, and for those of you who managed to watch our first session, of course, that's where we touched upon exercises that included breathing, relaxation and warm-up games.
And I hope you did practice the breathing from last week, because if any of you were suffering from any anxiety or even insomnia, well, let's say I hope it worked, and keep on doing it.
So this session we want to talk about the fundamental difference about working in all the different media that actors have to work in. Obviously they work in theatre, they work in television, they work in radio, film, and although talent and truth are the most important things, techniques alter between each of those media.
Yeah, they're very different. And actually, to give an example of something that David's been in, which was Warhorse with the National Theatre, if you look at Warhorse, the film, which Spielberg actually directed, if you think of that, and then that huge epic piece of theatre that Marianne Elliott directed when it was at the National Theatre and then indeed on a worldwide tour, you can start to kind of imagine that how different TV, film and theatre is. Everything has to be, of course, much bigger for theatre. But if you always start with the truth as an actor, with the nucleus of truth, then it can build. It's not like pantomime where it's just big, big, big. Everything has to start with truth. But of course, with television, as we always say, the camera is the audience. So the camera comes into you. You don't have to send it out there and push out all your emotions. Of course, when you're on a stage, yes, you have to feel the truth and you have to believe it, but you also have to be aware that somebody has paid good money on the back row. So you really do have to be aware of just keeping the truth, but making it slightly bigger.
So to sum up, the fundamental difference between theatre and working on camera is that in theatre, you are projecting out, you are reaching out, correct? And television, film, the audience come to you. You're not going out to the audience, they're coming to you. They're coming to you absolutely close, and they're watching you there. That in simplistic form is the basic difference between the two.
Yeah, and actually a thing we always say about theatre, which is why we both really enjoy theatre so much, is the control that you have, that when you go out at 7:30 at night, nobody is actually snipping away or editing. It is your baby until maybe 10 o'clock at night, and you travel a journey, and that journey is uninterrupted. It's you and the cast on a journey from 7:30 till 10, absolute control of what the audience see. Whereas with television,
you don't have the control, because the control is then forfeited. The control goes to the director, the control goes to the editor, and the control goes to the DOP, the director of photography. And quite often, some of your best scenes never actually make the final cut. Some of those wonderful duologues you had where you were working, you did some marvelous emotional stuff, and the camera is just trained on the person listening. We don't actually see the person who was talking. You don't have the control. But on theatre, you have total control. The other fundamental difference between working, I think, in theatre and working in television is the rehearsal period.
Yes, that's very true. Of course, in theatre, you can have the luxury of, anything from up to 3 weeks to 10 weeks, depending on the budget and the theatre that you're working for and the company. Whereas in television, more and more often now, it's actually rehearse record, which means that you go in, you have a line run, the director gathers the actors around, you have a line run, and then you put it on the set, and then the crew are called in to look at it with a view to lighting and where the cameras are going to be. And then that's it, you're on. So there's very little rehearsal time.
Yeah. So the preparation for the two is totally different. The preparation for theatre can actually happen in the rehearsal room. You work as an ensemble, as Stanislavski and some of the great practitioners, which we're going to talk about in later sessions.
Yeah, and for building a character, which again we're going to deal with later on.
So all that creative work can be done in the rehearsal process. For film and for TV and, the creative process has to happen in your bedroom, in your hotel room, because when you come on set, you have to have 90% of the work already there. You have to have your lines as well learnt. Whereas in rehearsal, they can slowly develop over a long rehearsal period.
Yeah.
They can go in by osmosis. They can be absorbed. For television, you've got to knock them all in every night, the night before the scene that you're going to shoot.
Well, that's right, because with theatre, it's kind of repetition. So therefore, every day, it's just slowly sinking in those lines. Well, you do really with film and television have to, they're more rammed in because there isn't that repetition of rehearsal. So they are totally different.
And the other fundamental difference, which we did touch upon, you go out of the theatre 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, you start at the beginning and you travel the whole journey from start to finish. For film, it's a mosaic. You do a little bit here, a little bit there, you do that scene, you do this scene, you may do the final scene before you've even shot anything else. You're doing the very final scene of the TV programme or the film. And then eventually that mosaic is all put into place. So you have to remember where your character's been, where the story's been before each scene that you shoot, because you're shooting it totally out of story order.
And that's not because the production company want to be awkward. It's all down to budget. Because obviously if everything is shot on an exterior at the beach this particular day, every scene will be shot at the beach. Whether you're playing a scene mourning the death of a character who's played by an actor that you might not have even met yet. So it's all out of sequence, but it's because money talks, and that's the way it is. But actually also at the end of this, we're going to put 2 speeches up for you to look at. And it would be really great if you could just imagine a camera on you during one rendition of the speech, and then maybe actually feeling how it is to be on a stage for that speech. So that's an exercise for later.
Now in this session, we're going to also talk about practitioners. Now, what are practitioners? What are we talking about practitioners? I suppose if you look at the evolution of acting over the years, as it evolved, as certain people sort of grasped it by the nettle, popped up and thought, there's got to be a good way of actually teaching this, of actually training people how to act. Now, obviously, the one thing that actors require is talent. What they do with that talent can be taught, and it has been taught over the years by some very important practitioners, hasn't it?
Yeah, the thing is, it started actually, I think whenever anybody thinks of drama practitioner, there is one name that everybody thinks of, and that's Stanislavski. And it's a good question why he was the first. Constantin Stanislavski, he was born in 1863 in Russia. And at that time, from a very young age, he was really interested in acting. And he was from a very rich family. And they actually built him a theatre in their garden, in their huge grounds. So he was incredibly fortunate. So, but from a very early age, he was so fascinated by the craft of acting that he wanted to perfect it. And he was surrounded, as a slightly older actor, as he got into his 20s, in Russia, there was a style of acting that was very grand and very large, and everything was very presented in a way, again, a little bit like pantomime. And Stanislavski knew that that was not the way he perceived great acting to be. So he decided he would develop, and he worked on it for years, a system that actually would help actors. So it would literally be like a toolkit for actors. And some of the techniques he had are fascinating, and we find actually that when we're dealing with young actors or any actors who are training, you do reach for those techniques without really ever thinking, oh, that's Stanislavski, because as he said, and indeed many practitioners after him said, what I teach is what good actors have always been doing. So some of the things that he dealt with was a series of questions for the actor to ask. Who am I? This is the character. Who am I? What do I want? What is my goal? What is my objective? What's stopping me getting this objective? What's stopping me getting my goal? if I get my goal, what am I going to do with it? And these are some of the basic questions that he asked. A very important one is the magic if. If you say Stanislavski to a lot of people, they go, oh, the magic if. And the magic if is, what would I do in this situation? If I was in this situation, what would I do? That magic if. He also dealt with emotional recall, which was, if you've had a traumatic experience in life, can you relate to the character then? So, for instance, if you're playing Hamlet or Hamlet's mother or Ophelia, and you'd had this dreadful experience that you were trying as an actor to emulate, that you could draw upon your own experience. So that's Stanislavski in a very minute nutshell.
And I think it's important to say that, of course, Stanislavski, he was at the turn of the century. So all his theory, all his teaching was based on theatre, because, of course, the mechanical media hadn't actually really come into existence. So he didn't really know much about film, TV, radio. As far as he was concerned, acting was about theatre, and he applied all his techniques to the theatre. Now, of course, in the 20s and the 30s, he actually visited with his ensemble. He actually visited America to try and spread the word, to show the Moscow Arts Theatre, which he came with, to show the sort of work that they were doing. And it so happened that coincided with the sudden growth of Hollywood, the Hollywood film era. And suddenly he realized, or suddenly people, other actors and other directors and other writers realized that what Stanislavski was teaching, his truth that you had to find, the characters that you had to find, this would work very well on film. And particularly with the growth of Hollywood, they were looking of how to constantly improve the quality of performance on film. And that's where the crossover is between Stanislavski and the people in America who took his teachings to heart and ran with it.
Yeah, and of course the Moscow Arts Theatre was a revelation to people like Lee Strasberg, who is another practitioner, to Sanford Meisner, who is another practitioner.
All people who actually saw Stanislavski's work when he came to America, were absolutely inspired by it and wanted to take it forward.
Yeah, it was a total revelation to them, and they wanted to know. And the thing that Stanislavski was very well known for, the work he spent with, say, the actor playing Hamlet, was exactly the same amount of work as he would give to the girl or the guy playing a servant. So it was ensemble work. That was really important. And so people like Lee Strasberg loved the idea of that, because it was not about the big star and then all the minions. It was about absolute sharing. It was an ensemble piece. And they really couldn't understand how every single actor on that stage was absolutely in that present moment, right there, right. So truthful that it was quite revolutionary for them. And so people like Stella Adler, all the names that you may have come across, Meisner, Lee Strasberg, Uta Hagen was actually a little bit later than that, but they all took Stanislavski. So he is actually the master, he is the creator. And
he's the father figure, really, of acting as we know and perceive it today.
And each of those other people did bring something else to the table, but actually, it was all taken from Stanislavski. So, for instance, Lee Strasberg, instead of saying emotional recall and just drawing on a trauma that you might have had or a happy incident or whatever, he wanted you to actually completely absorb yourself in that, for instance, tragedy, and actually really be that and take it on board. And then there were other practitioners like Stella Adler who said this is going to mess with the mental health of actors if we do that. So there was lots of interwrangling between the for instance, Lee Strasberg claims to have trained Marlon Brando, but Marlon Brando says no, it was Stella Adler. So there's lots of that along the way.
But Lee Strasberg he set up the Actors Studio eventually, and there's some very famous actors came out of the Actors Studio, including people like one of the biggest, of course, is Al Pacino, and Robert De Niro, and Dustin Hoffman. Wonderful story about Dustin Hoffman, because Lee Strasberg, really taking Stanislavski one step further, invented what we now call the method. You may have heard of method acting. What do we mean by method? It means involving yourself so much in the character, using emotional recall to find things that happened in your own life that you could relate to, and therefore, until you're actually totally absorbed in what you're doing, totally absorbed in the emotional context of the character, you can't perform. You're using the method. Now, wonderful story about Dustin Hoffman. He did a movie with Laurence Olivier called The Marathon Man. Laurence Olivier came obviously from the classical British school of acting, a brilliant actor, but didn't feel the necessity of going to the depths that the American actors were going with the method. He was fundamentally wonderful in his own right. So there was a clash. He meets Dustin Hoffman in The Marathon Man. And they have a scene where Dustin Hoffman, who has to run a marathon before he actually sits in the dental chair that Laurence Olivier is an evil dentist, he's going to pull his teeth out. Before they do that scene, for some reason, they're waiting and waiting. Dustin Hoffman eventually appears, covered in sweat. He's been running because he knows that scene involves him starting the scene as if he's just run a marathon. He has run right round Central Park. He sits in a chair, exhausted, sweating. Laurence Olivier turns around to him and says, well, where have you been? We really need to start this scene. He said, I've been running to get the right feel. You know. And Laurence Olivier turned around and said to him, have you ever considered acting?
But the thing is, it's not that Laurence Olivier didn't follow
not at
methods.
all.
He actually
not to take anything away
he was
from
a
him.
fan of Stanislavski, but he felt that what Dustin Hoffman was doing was just one step too far. And indeed, Daniel Day-Lewis, when he was doing Last of the Mohicans, he actually, for a few months before they went into shooting, would not eat any food that he hadn't hunted and killed himself. So, before next week, we thought it would be quite interesting if you look at those two speeches that we're going to actually add to this. Look at the approach as if you were performing it on stage and if you were performing it on television. So you're imagining that camera coming much closer. You can even record yourselves and you can compare the two techniques. What also would be interesting is if you look at those techniques that we've talked about, Stanislavski versus someone a bit more extreme like Strasberg. We will put their different techniques up so you can compare the two, and let's have a few versions of those speeches for you to actually see all the differences that are possible in those techniques.
Yeah, so fundamentally, those are the main practitioners of the 20th century. Those are the people who have actually moulded the way that we perceive acting as it is today. So we'll leave it there, and in our next session we're going to look at building a character through improvisation, the way Stanislavski would work, and we look forward to seeing you then. So until then, we're going to say goodbye and see you next time.